Hey, welcome back to a brand new episode of the Woodpreneur podcast. This is your host, Steve, and today's guest is Brian Ciciora, who is the founder and CEO of Truewerk. How you doing, Brian?
Great, Steve. Good to be here.
I'm excited to have you on. We don't normally, well, you probably are the first sort of apparel brand that we've ever had on the podcast. And I'm excited to have you on. And because I want to learn more about your story and how you got to creating. And when I did a little bit of digging into your story, most businesses start because you are trying to solve your own problems, right? And so why don't you tell everybody just a little bit of the backstory, like about your entrepreneurial, and I mean, it sounds like you're a woodpreneur as well. That talk about your woodpreneur journey.
Yeah, absolutely. Excited to talk about this, Steve. And, I tell this story in short form frequently to people who are just trying to get a little background on Truewerk. But listening to your podcast and understanding your audience a little bit, I'd kind of be interested in going a little deeper in the sort of journey that led me to starting Truewerk. That really involves a journey through woodworking and metal fabrication and trying to start businesses associated with the trades, if that's all right.
Absolutely, yeah. That's what we want to hear for sure.
So this kind of goes back to like 2008 during the start of the recession then, and I was working in a tech startup at the time and got laid off. I was good friends with our CEO, and he sat me down and said, "Hey, man, we're letting you go effective immediately." And it went on a little bit to say, geez, you got all the goods. You could make it in this tech industry. I was doing sales at the time. He said, but your heart just doesn't seem like it's in it, and I think you need to go like build a house or something. And I kind of laughed and then took it to heart and realized that to a certain extent I'd been playing in a game that I was set up to play. Go to college, get a job behind a desk, try and make money. But my heart was in building. It was in the trades, and I was ultimately just going to keep getting set up for failure in desk jobs. And it was a leap of faith. It was a jump to leave the security of a desk job and to ultimately do something that I often felt like society was telling me was, in some way beneath me, but that in my heart it felt like the right journey. And so, that led me to start to pursue a passion and an interest in furniture making. But it was kind of scary because I'd never tried to make a living building and selling something like that. And so that the sort of entrepreneurial journey began. And one of the big lessons that came from those early days was something that served me and continues to serve me. And this idea of what I call looking before you leap, trying to figure out and gauge risk. And you've probably seen this, but most entrepreneurial people get categorized as kind of these crazy, super risky, desiring folks that just bet everything and jump off the cliff in Silicon Valley style. And I think that's wrong. It's one of many
Absolutely.
wrong
It's
depictures.
I think that narrative is for people that have really big safety nets.
Totally right. And
Right.
you can get started on a tangent on that entirely. But entrepreneurship is not about taking crazy risks. In fact, most of the great entrepreneurs that I know who have done well, they find they're risk averse people, and they're typically driven to try to take risk because they view the risk associated with not taking action as greater than sitting there and not taking the risk. Right. But the question is, how do we mitigate that? And so I was in this position where I'm like, I think I can sell furniture, but I don't know if it's the right move. And I did this crazy thing that my friends kind of laughed at me, but there's a brand called Design Within Reach, and they make these fancy, well, they're not fancy, they're expensive tables they're steel frames, simple steel frames with a simple wood top to them. And I thought, I'll bet I could make something just as nice and maybe charge as much, maybe not, but I don't know. And so I took out an ad on Craigslist and I tried to sell one of their tables. And I was like, I wonder if I could sell one of their tables for a price that I could produce it at, and if there would be any interest for that. And I got this huge, and I didn't have one of their tables at the time. I was just like, I wonder if anybody would try to buy this from me. And I got a ton of people that wrote in and they were like, I want one, I want one, I want one. And of course I didn't have one. So I wrote them back and I was like, that one's gone, but I'll make one for you if you want. And they were like,
entrepreneurial. That's like, yeah, I like you say that you can build it, and then and you see if the market wants it. That's what you do. That's awesome.
Yeah, it was just a total test. And when everybody came back and they were like, yeah, I want, and that's when it all started. So I was welding these simple frames. I moved up to Winter Park, Colorado, which is a mountain town about an hour from Denver, and was welding these simple frames. And then I actually struck up a bunch of relationships with arborists down in Denver in the Front Range here. And we were using mostly like Siberian elm, which is a species that grows really rapidly here in Colorado. There were a ton of these trees that were being taken out, and it was beautiful wood to work with. And so, and of course, the customers loved the story of locally harvested wood and turned into simple tops.
You're speaking,
and that
language.
Was kind of how.
This is our language.
Yeah,
this is our love language. Yes, yeah.
It was awesome. And it was, it was wood that I could get that was less expensive than if I had bought it from other stores. It had all the upsides, and it was great for the marketing. And that was the early stages. And I was buying steel from a company here in Denver, but it took me an hour and a half to drive down to Denver every day or every week and then come back. And I wound up striking up a relationship with the group in locally who was a big steel fabricator, and they would bring a load of steel up once a week. And so I was able to buy steel from them and save the trip. And then they suckered me into, they were like, you know how to weld? And I'm like, yeah, pretty good, and they were like, well, why don't you do some welding for us? And so I ended up with this job doing metal fabrication, and we did big, spiral staircases and ornamental railings and structural work. And I got to really get good at the steel fabrication part of things. And I think there's a lesson here for people who are looking at opportunities in the skilled trades. And there's this narrative that life in the skilled trades is kind of like this sentence that at 18 you sign up for the skilled trades and you're going to forever be a plumber if that's where you start out. And if you listen to people on your podcast, Ryan Penner was a guy you interviewed. I listened probably a year ago or something to that podcast, and he was started out, I think, as a mechanic. And then he got into tree work, and then he got into firewood processing. And then they got into, it's just this journey that you can move around, and there's so much opportunity that it's anything but a closed door. And the journey through all of these different skilled trades often culminates in doing something that combines a bunch of them in a way that really works for you.
Yeah, it's like you develop this little cocktail of specializations based off of your creativity, what the market needs, and like what excites you, right? Like, because I can imagine that, like, you're salvaging trees, that's one conversation, right? Like you're finishing the wood, that's another conversation. And then you get to put on your welder hat, you're like, whoa, that's, so you get to really get this breadth of like, like it's almost like it's like a general studies liberal arts education in entrepreneurial, like, you know what I mean? It's so awesome. So awesome.
And Steve, what's so cool about the stories on your podcast is they reflect the journey that I see all the time in the skilled trades. There's this concept in this narrative in American culture that life and work in the trades is about hard work. And that everybody just stops there. There are brands, everything is focused on hard work. And it's so important, we all have to work hard, but it's a tiny part of the narrative in success here. And you use the word creativity, right? The skilled trades are about creativity. They're about problem solving. They're about ingenuity. They're about being media savvy. They're marketing. They're entrepreneurial. Entrepreneurship gets somehow stuck in Silicon Valley. But if you think about it, our community in the trades is the largest entrepreneurial community in the country, if not the world.
If not, that's absolutely true. That it reminds me of this story. This guy in Alabama, Alasaw, this guy named Cliff, and Cliff did a business plan. He's in Alabama, right? So he did a $100,000 business plan competition, and he went up against these like all these tech startups. And his simple proposition was that Alabama has one of the largest urban forests in the US. I want to start a business where I take these trees and I make furniture and I create jobs. And he won. I was like, you just beat out all these people with these like big idea tech startups with this very simple idea. And I love that stuff because that's what we need. We need like very simple ideas that connect people to what's near and dear to them, right? Like you said, the elm, that was like, that was a Siberian elm, right? In Denver,
Yep.
in
Yep.
Colorado. It's like, yeah, like that connects people to what's real, right? Like they sit at a table every day, and it's a table that was made by somebody that they know, who the tree and the wood was harvested from somebody that they know. Like that's real, right? When you see
It
something
is.
on a phone or on an app, it's hard to connect to it, right?
Totally. And so much of this is real. These are real problems that people are trying to solve. And I think that, that journey is it's an authentic one. It's not somebody with a highfalutin idea or trying to, make something that isn't there. And I think the journey here, you look at the 4-year college education, which has become, such the norm. And frequently these are people who are, we don't know at 18, 19 years old what we want to be doing. And so we go off in search of the answer by spending too much money on an education. The trades are the antithesis of that. It's about learning skills that allow you to solve a problem. You learn, you learn to use a tool because you need to solve the problem that tool is designed to use or to do, not because you want to use the tool and then you go looking for the problem. And I think that's a very value creating model for education, and it exists very much in the skilled trades. And I think this is again something that is starting to get talked about more, and that needs to continue to be spoken about. The opportunities in the skilled trades, and bringing this back a little bit to Truewerk, there's a handful of things that we're really passionate about. The technical nature of our product is certainly a big part of that, but trying to correct the narrative and correct the misunderstandings of life and work in the skilled trades is so much of what this is about. We talk about the idea of trading up, and that life and work in the skilled trades is fundamentally a step up, not a step down. This isn't something that you do because you can't do anything else. It's oftentimes something you do when you can do anything else.
Absolutely. And I mean, a lot of people don't talk about it, but there's this skilled trades gap that's happening, right? Like there's going to a lot of people that are going to be retire in the next 20, 30 years. And so
Mhm.
there's going to be an even greater need for it. Yeah, we had somebody, blue collar cash. We worked with the writer of that. And the biggest thing that I think about, um as it relates to this field, is that people, so like I come from a pretty, like, my background is very like officey job. And I've, in the past year, I've really immersed myself, the past 4 years, since 5 years since I started Acres of Timber and a Woodpreneur sort of movement. Like I was always dabbling, and then this past year I've delved 100% in. And one of the things that I realize is exactly what you said. So whenever I show any of my sort of desk job friends the work that I do, like we just made 1,500 square foot of flooring from tree to floor, right?
Right.
And
That's awesome.
and I showed them how. They're astounded. And so
Right.
one of the things that I think with skilled trades that I think needs to happen is that, one, people need to know actually how much work goes into creating the things that people consume. Like I
Mm.
saw your video that you posted April of last year about essential workers.
Mhm. Yeah.
And you started off, you're like, the world, basically, like, you're like, the world is shut down, but you know what? I still got I still got signal on my phone. My electricity is working. My phone is working. It's like all this stuff, like it could have been worse. And yeah, it was bad, but it could have been worse. And the only reason why is because of this hidden culture, this hidden industry, right?
Mhm.
Like that is busy creating stuff. So like I'm, and I don't even know. I mean, I'd love to brainstorm, like, how do we like raise awareness for that, right? So that it's not just about like, as you know, the default alternative for the kid that isn't, you know, good at, you know, math, you know, the traditional schooling, right? Like, how does it become a norm, like a norm, and gets
Right.
praised?
Yeah, it's a great question, right? And I think, but you're spot on in terms of, you know, the problem we're characterizing. I think we talk about this as sort of an emergent. It's maybe not quite countercultural,
Mm-hmm.
but it's an emergent subculture. There's a group of people who are choosing to take a road that's not the most taken path, right? It's your
Yeah.
guidance counselor in high school telling you, hey, you know, you've got the opportunity to go to college. You know, you should do that. Here are all the great opportunities in college. And it takes somebody who's willing to, you know, to trade up, to say, hey, you know what? I hear you, but I think there's a better path for me. And I'm going to step off and take it.
Yeah.
That's not the easiest path by and large today. It
Totally.
is a path that requires some gumption. It requires you to say to people, you know what? I hear you. And I see there might be an opportunity there, but I think there's a better path for me. And hopefully it doesn't take everybody else, you know, their boss sitting them down and saying, hey man, I'm letting you go, and I'm not gonna recommend you go find another job just like this one. I think you need to find the path that's in your heart and go after it. um, it takes a little bit of guts, particularly early on right now, and hopefully with a group of leaders that show that. And social media, particularly right now, influencers on YouTube and on Instagram, they're showing that path, right? There are folks out there who are putting out content that's educational, which
Yeah.
is awesome. You learn from watching them. It's entertaining, right?
Yeah.
It's not painful to have to sit through a classroom to learn to do something, but more importantly, it's aspirational.
Yeah.
And I always think about like, what would, if I'm watching, you know, a Kyle Stumpenhorst, right? Our buildings. If I'm watching him on a job site and I'm saying, would I want my kid to grow up like him? And I can answer, yeah, absolutely. You know, that would be awesome. Those are the reference points. And it's when parents and teachers and guidance counselors are able to look at examples of success stories and
Yeah.
start using words like entrepreneurship, like creativity, like ingenuity, as they relate to the skilled trades today. They do, right? It isn't like we have to make this up. And this is a
Yeah.
beautiful thing, Steve, here, because it's not like we've got to get a community of people to do something they're not already doing, right?
Yeah.
That would be hard. If we had to figure out how to grit creativity and ingenuity and teamwork and communication skills, if we had to figure out how to teach that and get it started in the skilled trades, that would be hard.
All those
But we
soft
don't.
skills are baked into those
Totally.
trades. They're
It
totally
happens.
big. Like, I mean, you know, if you have, you know, 2 pallets of like of lumber that you need to move and on a tractor,
Yeah.
and you have to like navigate, you know, some really squirrely, like it's going to take some like figuring things out in order for you to get it done, right?
Cool. Yeah, imagine being at the top of a spar, right on the top of a tree, and you've got to figure out how to get a limb in between a roof line and a fence, right down onto the ground without killing anybody. And then you got to get the next one. You got to drop a whole tree that way, like that. It requires so much communication and trust, right? And skill, and the rigging skills associated with
But the
that.
self, but also too the self-awareness, right? Like the self-awareness to know that like, oh, I got a big day, I got to get some sleep, I got to eat a good breakfast, I need to be in a very calm state, right? Like I mean, it's kind of like, I mean, if we were to reverse engineer it, I feel like, you know how some countries have like mandatory military, right? Like
Yeah,
you
yeah.
just mandatory like skilled trades,
Can
right?
you
Just
imagine?
to like to get empathy for other, like for people,
Yeah,
right? Like the
yeah,
empathy for hard work and what, you know, an appreciation for material and not waste.
yeah.
Like, yeah.
You know what would happen if we did that, Steve?
What would happen?
Nobody leave the skilled trades. They'd be like, oh, I just did. What do you mean? I got to go do something else after this? They would stay in it. They would be like, this is amazing. Why would I
Yeah.
go sit behind a desk to do what? You're crazy. If they
Yeah.
got to try it, right, and they got to live for you know, what is it, a mandatory 2 years, right?
Yeah.
Year to 2, they would figure out, get up in the morning, you know, hang out with a group of people who you love working with, get started with the day, build something that matters, right? Impact people's lives, fix things that society needs to have happen, work outside, get done physically tired, but feeling strong.
Care about your community too, right? Like care about, so I'm total tangent. So like one of the things that I got, I do some consulting, nonprofit consulting. I did a strategic planning session for a community group on the south side of Chicago, right? And every week on Wednesdays, every morning for an hour and a half, there's a group of 30 people that hop on a Zoom call to talk about how to better their community environmentally and sustainably. It's south side of Chicago, one of the poorest parts of the country, most dangerous parts. And on Tuesdays they do like they pass out food. They're doing recycling programs, they're addressing food deserts, and they have this little idea of planting trees and creating jobs like arborist, tree care. And then somebody said, oh, I wonder what would happen if we took all of the trees and we started making products. And I'm like, wow, imagine if that happened across the country, like, because those are literally all skilled trades, right? And so so we're totally digressing, and I would love to just
bring it back.
Tell me how. So you started, making stuff and selling it, welding. You went down this at what point did you start, like, the inkling? What was the step before Truewerk?
Yeah, in terms of where did the sort of notion of Truewerk and the vision for that come
where
from?
where were you at the time?
Yeah, so I was doing the work in Winter Park, 9,000 feet, middle of winter. We were building houses, we were doing steel work and working outside, and we were working in in traditional canvas denim stuff. And it's snowy on the ground. You'd start out in the middle in the morning, and your leg would start to get wet. The water would soak through, and you'd have an icicle on your leg as the sun set in the afternoon. And we just assumed that's the way it was. And in this story goes, I took a trip to Europe about that time, and I was a pretty avid skier and climber, and went to go ski and climb there. And I looked around at the people who were doing the jobs I was doing in the US, in Germany and in Austria. And they were working in clothing that was as technical as I had come to ski and climb in. And it dawned on me that there was no reason why I shouldn't be using the technical fabrics and higher end garments on the job site that I was enjoying in the mountains. And so I kind of switched. This was 2009 at that point. And I made the switch, and I just used those fabrics, and they worked great. And I figured it'd be a year or two between, before Carhartt and Duluth and other brands had solved the problem. Fast forward, another 2 or 3, 4 years. And I had been working for a company in the outdoor industry, doing product development and some working from work for them. We sold that business in 2014, and I had the opportunity to look at what I wanted to do next, and the need to bring technical fabrics, higher end garment construction.
Whoa. I think you just skipped a part in your story. So you were doing this, you were doing your work, the building work. Yep. You went to Europe, you came up with this idea to start using technical fabrics in your building, construction, woodworking type work, especially when you're outside, right? And then
I skipped a part here. So So for like 5 years, I got pulled into a company called Backcountry Access that makes snow safety equipment, right? Okay. So they needed help with some testing on an airbag program, these inflatable things that pull people out of avalanches. So it's like a backpack that has an inflatable pillow.
Sure.
And they called me down from Winter Park and said, hey, I know you've done some product development work in the past. Would you come help for 2 weeks? 2 weeks turned into 2 months. 2 months turned into 2 years. And I wound up running all of product design and product development for this company.
How'd you learn that skill?
I've been building stuff my whole life, and I grew up working on cars, building stuff around this with my dad. I have an engineering degree that I got long time ago. And fundamentally, my life has been centered around building stuff. And it doesn't
Just
matter
like
whether
building
it's
stuff. You
a
like, you're
medical
curious.
device or it's a table. The process is the same. It's about working with people. It's about, solving problems. And I've had the
Gotcha.
privilege to work on everything from, really sophisticated medical devices to, to building furniture. And I'll tell you, anybody who is passionate enough to try to figure out how to take down a tree and make that tree into a table can go on to build a medical device, because the process is exactly the same.
I'm 100% convinced that is absolutely true. Right. Like that same energy to take to fell a tree in between two houses, right? Like that same
Yeah,
energy.
totally. And Steve, let me tell you, I've gotten an appreciation for arborists, right? Like when I started Truewerk, one of the first groups that latched on to us were arborists. They like the technical performance of the fabric. And I'm like, part of my view on building product and solving problems is you've got to get as close to the person who's going to be using your product as you can. And so one of the first steps for me was to learn how to climb trees. And I've actually gone on to compete in 3 ISA sanctioned arborist climbing competitions. And I can get to the top of a tree. I couldn't make a living doing this like people in our community do, but I can do it well enough to appreciate the challenges.
Yeah.
And, I think that's a big part of our culture at Truewerk is if we're going to make a garment that's designed to be used in, heavy equipment maintenance, or it's going to be used in tree care.
Yeah.
It's important for me and for my team to be as close to users as we can, so that when somebody calls me up and says, hey man, I'm getting picks on the right calf because my chainsaw, when it's on my harness, and I'm like, say no more. I totally know, because my pant had that same problem. It allows us to build the garments to work best for the people using them. If we ourselves can be, again, not in any way saying that I could go out and make a living as a professional production climber, that's a different level. But I get it. And I love that community, and I love the people who are a part of it.
Yeah, that's part of design, about design thinking, right? Like it's empathy, right? Like that's you put yourself in the community that you want to serve. You put them in your you just kind of get in their place, and you understand what their problems are. Okay, so that's good context.
So coming back, right? So there was this idea I had that long story short, we sold Backcountry Access to K2 in 2014, something like that. Okay. K2's, they were owned by even a bigger company. And I'm like, that's not my thing. I like working in the early stages of value creation, and I want to get back to that. What problem am I most interested in solving? And the need for really technical garments in the work environment was very much still there. And for me, it represented an opportunity to bring the experience in product design to bear. Also, I just spent 6 years working in the ski industry, and no, disservice to the ski industry, but to a certain extent, that's a whole industry you could take off the face of the earth, and there would be, a bunch of rich dudes that would have to figure out what to do with their Saturday afternoons. The world would never know the difference. And for me, getting back to serving a community that if you took Truewerk's community off the table, civilized life would cease in not like days, but like hours. I was really excited about getting back to a community, frankly, who I've spent some of the best days of my life with.
It's a big problem, and it's a big community that is grossly underserved.
Totally. And I was stoked, right? For me, this was the confluence of all the things that I've been super passionate about for a long time. And that's Truewerk in a nutshell, right? It is about bringing really technical garments and taking a forward look. So much of workwear, the brands, the product, it's all historical. It's about celebrating the past, the way things were in the 1800s, right? And that's okay in a way, but we have a different view, right? Our view is that the past is the past. We're stoked on the future. We think it's the present is great. We think the future is going to be even better. And we want our products and our community and our brand to reflect that. And so we leave kind of the historical heritage vintage thing to others. And as a brand, our product and all of what we're about is embracing the future and celebrating the present, because we think it's awesome, and we think the people who are a part of this today aren't getting their shake on that.
I get it, and I completely understand what you're talking about. So, so you decided to do this. how'd you like get, so you said it's funny you said the arborist. So for a little while, if you dig into the archives of the podcast, I interviewed a bunch of arborists, and I was like, arborists are literally like the extreme athletes of like skilled trades. And there's like a little
100%.
bit, I hate to categorize, but like they are like they're 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 the ones that are dropping off of cliffs
Hmm.
like on skis and snowboards,
Yeah.
right? They're the ones that are like, they'll go hella skiing, right? Like they just go, because their mindset is just like they're like on edge, but they're very hyper focused. And
Yeah,
I got a
totally.
whole, it's yeah, arborists are like, or tree climbers, they're a vibe. They're totally, it's their own vibe.
Totally.
And I got to appreciate, that was really awesome. So the first garment, what, like, how'd you do it? How'd you sell it? Like all of that.
Yeah. So I mean, this is going back to that look before you leap, right? I'm like,
Yeah.
okay, I think people would appreciate soft shell pants
Yeah.
because they stretch, they deal with moisture really well, they're ultra durable. Why are we not using those? And so then it's a test, right? How do I conduct what was effectively my old Craigslist, scheme where I try and sell that table to somebody that I don't even have? Well, this is a game where my wife and I had a small amount of savings,
Mhm.
classic story, just like everybody else. And you take a little bit of a risk. You try and take a small enough risk that if it fails, you still have a house
Yeah.
and you can still, but my wife's a school teacher and we lived off of her salary for the first year and a half, a small savings, and was able to work with a factory that was willing to produce a very small number of pieces.
Yeah.
Bought, pushed the limits of minimum order quantities. And, it's funny, I can remember our first fabric orders. We were buying about 1,000. We were begging the factory to make less than 1,000 yards for us.
Yeah.
And literally, I was working with our production planning. That same fabric, we're forecasting over 1 million yards of production next year on. And I can remember, less than 1,000 yards of production. So, we started with 4 pieces. Our T3 pant, which we still produce today, was part of that collection. There was
Yeah.
a parka that we still produce today.
Yeah.
And we bought a tiny piece, and we tried to sell through that inventory with the intent that if we could sell through that inventory, we could buy some more.
Yeah.
And that was the start. And it turned out that, people did want it. And it was something that the market was hungry for. And we've been able to kind of continue along those lines. We have investors today that have been instrumental. I
Yeah.
think one of the biggest, I don't know that it's a lesson, but it's one of the things, the attributes that's enabled me to be as successful as we've been on this has been being coachable. There's so much of this that I didn't understand, and I was able to, just by, I'll call it luck, get a couple of mentors who have built, apparel businesses. There's a guy named Dan Nordstrom, who's one of our lead investors and been a mentor for me, came from the Nordstrom family, built Outdoor Research as an apparel brand.
Yeah.
And he's just taken me under his wing, as have a number of other folks. And I just listen. And when they say, hey man, you got to go left, and, and here's why, you hang a left.
Yeah.
And I think being coachable, being humble, and recognizing what you don't know and being
Yeah.
willing to listen has been instrumental in the success that we've had.
That's amazing. That's so cool. Um, I guess what's the future hold for you? What are you looking to get into? What new territories or realms that you see yourselves going? Like just from an entrepreneurial perspective, right? Like, I'm sure there's like new types of fabrics and new types of things, but like what's the vision, and where do you see yourselves?
Yeah, I mean, I think, an entrepreneurial journey should start with a problem you're trying to address. And,
Yeah.
and you build a platform to address the problem. If you're trying to build a park across the street, you may not need a massive organization. You might need, some neighbors, some funding. You put that together, you get the problem solved, and you move on to the next problem. The problem that Truewerk sees is pretty big, right? Like, we see a cultural problem. There's a shift that we want to see in American culture that surrounds life and work in the skilled trades. And, part of this is a technical issue that has to do with the garments, the way they look. You know, I sometimes in a way refer to this a little bit as a costuming, in the sense that, like, imagine going to a play or a movie and looking at what people are wearing.
Yeah.
Nothing tells you more about the character and the role that character is expected to play in that play than what they're wearing.
Yeah.
And I think there's a big cultural opportunity for us to sort of correct the costume, if you will, make it so that when somebody shows up on a job site, they look like a professional and the role that they're playing is elevated. And I want that person to leave the job site and go to their son's soccer game or their daughter's, you know, the softball game. And for people in the stands to go, ah, nice. You know, I see what that guy does. That's awesome. Just based on the way they show up. And that's a part of this. We want to correct the misunderstandings of life and work in the skilled trades. We want people to understand what it means to trade up. That's a big problem. So when I think of the entrepreneurial journey here, for me, it's about trying to grow the platform and the cause that we're ultimately here to try and champion and elevate the community. So that is, you know, some of that's product, but a lot of that is partnerships. It's working with other members, other brands, podcasts, people who are looking to tell the same story. And so, you know, one of my big asks is that if there are people in the audience that are listening to this, that have a story that needs to be told, that have, you know, something that we can help to elevate, be that small or large, contact us, let us know. We'd love to have you as customers, but more importantly, we're here to try and elevate the work that you're doing and the narrative that's a part of the community.
You know, that's what you just said kind of really struck a chord. You're like, you want to be able to, like, how people show up in all aspects. That you essentially said you want to help elevate how people show up in all areas of their life.
100%.
That's kind of a massive vision, right? Because then it brought me to, like, one of my nephews. He was saying how so my in-laws, my family, we have a sawmill, right?
Mm-hmm.
And my father-in-law, who started it, he's like skilled trade, like builder's license, built his own house. Like, he's like a mentor to me, right? Like, completely changed how I look at all of this work and is the inspiration behind Woodpreneur, everything. So he was looking to, like, you know, so, like, get out, but, you know, he still loves the work. He's just, you know, wants to think about the future. One of my nephews says, well, he makes a joke to my nephew and was like, hey, so why don't you take over the business? And then my nephew, who wants to be an engineer, go to like 4-year degree, MIT, whatever, U of M, right? Like some big school, become an engineer. He was like, well, he goes, you know, I'm sure there's one of your grandkids that's not going to be successful and, you know, they can take over. And I was like, why does it have to be the unsuccessful person that does the skilled trades jobs? And literally what you just said, what you just said, and the mission is to change all of that, because it's not second class work. It's probably one of the most important work that lives out there, right? Like, houses wouldn't be made, like, all of this stuff. And so I love the approach that what you just said about you know, just the mindset and the vision of being able to change how people view this work through clothing, through apparel. And then I think you're probably even going a little bit deeper and just like through community, through education, through resources for this community as well. So anyway, that's really cool. That's so cool. So I'm kind of hesitant to ask, but I'll just ask anyway. Is there anything that you need to think through as yourself that I could help you think with, marketing or business wise, that could also just be that could be a resource to the community? So I always ask this at the end. It's funny that as you listen to this, one of the advice that I just gave to another person, they took action on, and they were able to get I think 12 or 1300 new followers on Instagram in a day, just from the advice that I gave. So is there anything that you need to think through, or anything that just like maybe recently came up marketing wise that you'd uh help me, help you brainstorm about?
Yeah, good question. I mean, we're constantly working on talking about trade up and this idea of conveying the distinction in this belief that life is countering the story you just told, right? How do we try to, as a company and as a brand, reach not just the people who will ultimately do the work, right? The people who will um, be in the skilled trades, but how do we reach the people beyond them? Because this is not just a message that I think it needs to start with the people who are, central to our community. But we want to get to the next group out there. I think that's from a marketing standpoint, and whether you want to call this marketing or something else, building that, that understanding that goes beyond your first layer of your audience. How do you
Yeah.
get to the next, that audience that's beyond your first audience, if that makes sense?
Yeah. So is it more about like reaching the audience beyond, or reaching the audience that doesn't know that you exist, that will eventually has a chance to become your primary audience?
Let me so here's a great example, right? I think solving some of these issues revolves around parents, right? How do I reach mom and dad so that when they're talking to Sarah or to Jimmy, and Sarah and Jimmy are trying to figure out at 16, 17 years old, what options do they have?
Yeah.
That mom and dad go, look, you should consider this path, as opposed to your example of, oh, if you fail at everything else, I guess you could try this.
Yeah.
How do we reach that group so that the opportunity here is understood
Yeah.
early on, and that you don't have another generation of
Yeah.
people who feel like they have to kind of buck the system to make a decision that's frankly an excellent choice for them.
Yeah. Well, I love that idea because it kind of goes back to like my sort of nonprofit youth development background.
Nice.
Um, in that it almost feels like we need to make this work cool, and and potentially picking three or four different. So you pick like a woodworker, maybe you pick like an arborist, maybe you pick like like a tree climber. You pick maybe the four that are core to you, right?
Mhm.
And we get some younger people in that field to just
Mhm.
to do like day in the life series.
Mhm. Mhm.
And then with you could because you can create the content, but the next level is to find the right distribution partner, right?
Mhm.
So
Yep.
potentially partnering up with some Gen Z mags, like TikTok, like getting some TikTok influencers, getting
Right.
some YouTube young influencers. And then if you also, so if you have the Truewerk brand, then you have these younger influencers and they're creating content that sort of highlights their work, right?
Mhm.
And what
Yep.
they're
Yep.
doing, right? And especially a super cool, creative way. And then you create some limited edition collaboration. So you get some brands that people are associated with that, or you get some brands that are outside of the apparel space, right? Whether it's a beverage brand or whether it's a hat, like whatever, so that they're tapping into their audience. That could be something. One other thing that you could do too, so that's like kind of like an ongoing series of young people, and you call it like True Work Next Generation or something like that,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
So like that's one thing. The other thing that you could do, and this could be like a more heady sort of intellectual exercise, would be to do a the future of True Work summit, right? Where you get some leaders and you get some influencers, and you make it so that you invite all of the educators and the guidance counselors across the country. And maybe you do it in association with like the, National Hardwood, Association, the Builders Association. So like you bring the idea to them and say, listen, we're the apparel partner to this, right? Like,
No, I like it. In reaching those guidance counselors feels like, there's a sweet spot there in terms of trying to correct, because those are influential folks, right? And they're
so
talking
influential,
to our
so
at the
influential.
right time. Mm-hmm.
So you could do a summit, and it's just like literally a video summit,
Mm-hmm.
and every school that registers could get a kit, and is a kit with like a brochure that they hand out to all of their kids, and then there's posters that hang out in the guidance counselor's office or in the school's office. It's got its own branded thing. Yeah, maybe you partner up with you don't make footwear, right? No. So yeah, so
Not
maybe
yet.
not yet. So, or maybe you partner with like a footwear brand. Like basically you find some complementary, not competitive brands
Mm-hmm.
to tap into their audiences. Like, listen, we're serving the same people. And I know you care about the future of our businesses in these industries. Let's partner up together. So those are two ideas that could help think about the long term.
Love it. Yeah, great idea, Steve. Love them.
Cool. So tell me how can people get in touch? What's Instagram, website?
Yeah, so Instagram, website, just Truewerk, Truewerk.com, at Truewerk on Instagram.
WERK.
ERK, Truewerk. Yeah, it's spelled a little funny there. So that's the best way to reach us. And you guys can hit me up. I'm at brian@truewerk.com. So if there are folks that want to get involved, that have ideas, I'm here, I'm available, and this stuff means a lot to me. And so I'm always interested in hearing from people in the community, and making sure we bring everybody to bear to make things happen when that makes sense.
Awesome, man. What's last bit of parting advice? One thing that has sort of helped fuel your success, or the biggest lesson you learned along the way. What do you think that is?
I don't know if there's a single biggest lesson here. One of our son's football coach used to say, whenever I talk, there's something I want you to know, and there's something I want you to do. And in total classic football coach way, right? But what I would want people to know is that there is more to life and work in the skilled trades than is often portrayed. And it's the ideas that are often communicated about white collar work, ingenuity, creativity, entrepreneurship, problem solving, those things happen in the skilled trades every bit as much. And you need to know that. And if you're on the job site every day, you do know that, but you don't always recognize it. And I need you to recognize that, right? Know that you have all of those same things going on, and you need to stand up and make sure other people get it, so that those things don't get washed aside. That's what I want you to know. What I want you to do is trade up. Find the opportunity. If trading up means taking your first job in the skilled trades and leaving the college path to somebody else because that's what's right for you,
Yeah,
do it. Trade up that way. If trading up to you means, hey, I'm going to move from being a mechanic into doing tree work, then do that. If it means I'm going to take my first step in the entrepreneurial journey and start my own business, trade up. Do it. Find ways to test and leap, look before you leap, as we've talked about, but fundamentally do it. And and then I add to those two things. There's a way I want you to feel.
yeah,
Right. And the way I want you to feel is I want you to feel a sense of pride. This is not a story of humility. The skilled trades have been sort of pushed down into this humble, put your head down and your nose down and just do the work. This is not that story, and that isn't to say you need to be cocky or arrogant, but I want you to feel a sense of pride. I want you to feel a sense of dignity, and I want you to feel a sense of connectedness, because that all exists here, and it's time for that to be the way we are in this community.
That's so cool. Yeah, I believe it 100%. I back that what you just said 100%. Yeah, like the work that this community is doing, no one else can do. Literally,
Well
no one
said.
else. No one else can do. So I think it's time for people to flex a little bit. Their skills and their work, because a lot of their work is actually visible, right?
Totally.
People overlook it, but it's visible. Okay, now I would just want to follow up one other thing before we hop off. So you said if going into the entrepreneurial realm, trade up. If you're an entrepreneur, how do you trade up?
Oh man, you listen to your podcast, right? Listen to the stories and the people that tell them, because they all know it. It is a game of incremental progress, right? And just once you're in it, it kind of tells you where you need to go next. Yeah. It's like a river. You just keep looking for the rapid. You set the boat up, you run the rapid, you get ready for the next one. And I think that's where the start is often can be the trickiest part. But once the journey's rolling, you just get up every morning and you solve the problems that are in front of you. And at some point it becomes second nature. But I think the hardest part of the journey is taking those first steps. And if we can get people comfortable with feeling like this is their domain, they're capable of doing it, and we lead them through the first few steps. There's this, it's surviving that first step. And I think that's the part that, I don't want people just jumping off thinking they're going to survive, but learn a few tricks on how to test the waters. Look for and it's a creative process, right? Like, how do I test this? And how do I know if it's going to work? And if you can test it without, I always say, we fire bullets before cannonballs at Truewerk, right? The idea is a bullet is a cheap, small test. And if you hit something with a bullet, you hear the dink, you're like, okay, line up the cannon and fire the cannonball that way. We don't start out with cannonballs. We start out with bullets. When we hit something with the bullets, then we load up the cannonballs. Yeah. And so I think, from an entrepreneurial journey standpoint, and you hear this time and again in your podcast, right? I mean, this is the story. I started it. We got it going. Here's what we're going to try next. And you're off to the races.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Brian, for your time, your wisdom, and the work that you're doing in supporting this community through your brand, Truewerk.
It's been fun, Steve, and likewise, appreciate all the work you're doing as well. It's fun to be a part of this.
Awesome. I'll talk to you soon.
All right. See you, Steve.